Hey, Blake T. Wild here, and today I am discussing Daredevil, one of the best and just most continually well-written characters that Marvel Comics has to offer. Created by Stan Lee and Bill Everett, redesigned by the infamously famous Wally Wood, reinvigorated as a badass ninja with an equally reinvigorated villain in the Kingpin, and a former love named Elektra. Ann Nocenti did something that no other Daredevil writer has ever done. She made him fight an evil vacuum, the literal devil, and created the best Daredevil villain, Typhoid Mary. And before we get started, leave a like and subscribe for more comic book videos just like this. Ann Nocenti was given the leftovers of Frank Miller's run on the Devil of Hell's Kitchen, both in the Marvel Universe and in ours. How do you follow up the inimitable Frank Miller? By telling stories that strove to bring real issues to the world of superheroes in exciting and emotional new ways. That's how. Ann Nocenti is just a different kind of writer, and it works so perfectly for this character.
One of the problems with superheroes is because I always had a problem with them because you have to escalate to a fight. And my comics, the fights were always the biggest problems. Like, I don't really want to fight, I want to peace negotiate. So, and I even why does everything, they're heroes, yet everything escalates to a fight. And so it was always like this tumor on the story narrative. Like, you build a story narrative, you have themes, for me it was a lot of journalistic influences from the streets of New York, especially in Daredevil, but then they had to fight. Then when the IP got so valuable with the films becoming multi-million-dollar, billion, whatever, they don't mess with them enough anymore. They don't mess with the superheroes enough anymore. They should. They should just say, because you get these notes when you're doing a superhero now, oh, so-and-so wouldn't say that, or that's off model is one of the things you get. Off model. And you're like, well, yeah, we should be doing off model superheroes to throw the gates open again.
According to a plethora of interviews where she's been asked the exact same question, Ann says that she never pursued or had any real interest in comics further than strips like Archie, Pogo, and Dick Tracy. Although like most writers, she did start off as an illustrative artist rather than a prose or poetic one, but that didn't really get her anywhere, so she took various jobs in New York and began going into careers such as journalism and film and studying there. Her first job at Marvel was granted to her when she answered an ad in a newspaper. She didn't particularly enter this pre-established world as a fan of it. Instead, she was entering as her own person with her own influences and interests outweighing that of a pre-existing environment. In her early career at Marvel, Ann Nocenti worked under the guidance and editorial teams of the likes of Louise Simonson, aka Wheezy, aka Mrs. Walt Simonson, Larry Hama, Al Milgrom, Archie Goodwin, and Mark Grunwald, who I believe is the greatest writer and creator that Marvel has ever had. Second only to Jack Kirby, of course. You can't top Kirby. When asked why she took the job of writing Daredevil after Miller, she said, quote,
I think it was because I was too new to comics to understand Miller's legacy or be intimidated by it, out of ignorance. And since I came from another field, I'd been working a bit in film and journalism, I think he liked the idea of a non-comics person bringing in other influences.
What Ann Nocenti did for Daredevil is take light and dark, humorous and depressing, heart-wrench and the spirit of life, and she brought these combinations and gave to Daredevil such a substance that just hasn't been accomplished since. Can you tell I have a crush on Ann Nocenti? And it's not just because her birthday is one day after mine. But Ann Nocenti is not the only person we have to thank for this absolutely incredible series. In time, I plan on discussing and covering the rest of her time on Daredevil, but in time she would be joined by artists John Romita Jr., Al Williamson inking, Joe Rosen lettering, and Christy Shield providing absolutely incredible colors. But we're not at that point yet. We're still at the beginning. We gotta work our way up to that. But I think you're gonna be pretty surprised to see which superstar artist who would go on to found a little certain company that starts with the letter I worked on an issue of this series. Christy Shield and Joe Rosen were here from around the beginning, pretty early on in the get-go, but it was the artists and inkers, John Romita Jr. and Al Williamson, who would have to come on at a later time. It may sound like I am fawning over this group, and that's because I am. I believe that this is one of, if not the best creative teams there has ever been on comics. Once they were all assembled, every issue was just knocking it out of the park. A complete artistic juggernaut of pure creative force that was left unbridled to roam wherever Ann Nocenti and John Romita Jr. wanted it to go.
How about Daredevil fights a vacuum cleaner? Okay, And then taking Daredevil to hell, which we only did because of John Romita Jr., because John Romita Jr. was like rocking it. He's such an amazing artist.
And I am so happy that I got John Romita Jr.'s autograph on the first appearances of Blackheart and the Typhoid Mary issues. Look how cool that is. Look at that. That's so awesome. Just Typhoid Mary flying at the camera with John Romita Jr.'s signature beneath. Perfect. And I hope to one day get Ann Nocenti and Christy Shield to sign them as well. And if you haven't noticed, this stack of comics right here, those are all the issues from Ann Nocenti's run on this series. Why do I have this many books stacked up right here as some sort of terrible background set decoration? That is because Marvel Comics has never fully completed or created or collected any series of this. There's no omnibus. There are trade collections of it, but they're like incomplete and sporadic in terms of what storylines they collect. So if you want to get it, you gotta buy every single issue yourself, like I did. And since it's never been collected properly, the title of this video, right down there that says Daredevil Volume 1, The Ashes of Hell's Kitchen, that's a name I made up. I made up all the titles for these volumes that I'm going to be covering of Ann Nocenti's Daredevil run because they've never been collected. And there's a total of 7 of them that I had to make sense of, like, okay, well, this is about every 5 to 6 issues. This is where this storyline starts and stops. There would be 7 total volumes. So Marvel, I know you're listening. If you ever want to publish any trades or collections and provide the well-deserved residuals and royalties or whatever legal term you call it to the team that worked on these books, and you need some names for the comics, I got all 7 of them, and I'll sell them to you for $1. I just want a check that says from Marvel Comics. And if you do want to hear more of an actual in-depth discussion on Ann Nocenti's Daredevil, my podcast, the Comic Shtick Podcast, which you can find linked along this video or just on my channel, I started it during my reread of this series. So like the first 10, 15 episodes of that show catalog my discussions and reviews of these comics sitting right behind me. Released in 1986, written by Ann Nocenti with art by Barry Windsor Smith, Sal Buscema, Steve Lealoa, Lewis Williams, and Todd McFarlane. This is Daredevil Volume 1, Ashes of Hell's Kitchen. The book begins at a clandestine government medical lab as a scientist explains how to create the perfect soldier, disconnecting the heart from the brain, silencing the soul between the nerves and the neurons until they strip the mind down to its very core, the reptilian brain. Black Widow then tells the doctor to get to the point, and he brings up a projection of the matter at hand. Agent Hazard, who was the perfect test subject for their sort of Weapon X, Weapon Plus experiments. That's right, Weapon Plus. This is like seemingly within the same area of study and experimentation that created the likes of Deadpool, Wolverine, and more recently, at least at the time of this story coming out, Nuke. A military-clad beefcake with the American flag tattooed over his face. You might recognize him from Jessica Jones. He was more recently in this universe right now. He and Daredevil just destroyed Hell's Kitchen in a massive war. Anyway, the doctor says that they are able to turn Agent Hazard into the perfect soldier capable of everything and compliant with every order. Black Widow asks what tipped him over the edge, and the doctor explains that the Nuke incident in Hell's Kitchen, aka the climax to Frank Miller's Daredevil, triggered a panic in Hazard who feared that he would break down just like Nuke did. And the doctor describes this in the most clinically horrific way possible. It was as if the blind spot between his eyes woke up. He then continues by explaining that all of the memories and images and illusions Hazard had that they were once suppressing through their experiments are now cascading back into his mind. The doctor is worried that he's going to destroy himself and anyone who is unfortunate enough to be nearby. And Black Widow asks where he might have gone to now that he's escaped, and the doctor tells her that the only thing that Hazard loved more than God or his country was his mother. He also explains that it's highly likely that Hazard is experiencing horrible hallucinations that could cause God knows what to happen, and their only solution right now is for Black Widow to murder him. Natasha then leaves the room and walks past a group of big tough agents who call her a Rusky spy, and say that Hazard must be almost dead if they're sending a woman after him. Meanwhile, in Hell's Kitchen, Jack Hazard, yeah, that's his real name, it's not a code name, sits at a diner reading a paper on the Battle of Hell's Kitchen. And then the waitress recognizes him. They went to high school together, and she used to have a huge crush on the guy. She says that the whole neighborhood was buzzing with rumors about when he enlisted and left, and they all expected him to come back as a big war hero, this and that. And then she brings up how he never actually came back to visit his mother or anyone else. Hazard stares at her as she puts an arm around his shoulder, and then she begins gasping for air. Hazard jumps up and calls her a slut for wearing the American Eagle on her shirt, and then barges out and runs outside where he finds a man selling fireworks for Independence Day. No, it's the doctor. Hazard freaks out, and as he stares into the doctor's eyes, the man hunches over and grabs his chest in pain. Hazard then sees the man as one of his fellow soldiers in his command and orders him to get back up, and then he snaps out of it and realizes what he's done and flees the area. Elsewhere in Hell's Kitchen, atop a roof, Daredevil hears blood clots form within the bodies of a man and a woman as their hearts slowly stop. Daredevil leaps into action and acrobatically makes his way to the scene. He arrives to find a man lying on the sidewalk, dead of a massive heart attack. As the crowd gathers, Black Widow appears before Daredevil, and then she, being intimately aware of how Matt thinks, tells him that there's nothing he could have possibly done for these people. Matt asks what Natasha's doing here, and she explains the hazardous situation. Later, as fireworks ignite in the sky above New York, Natasha tells him that while Nuke wasn't exactly a part of the same operation as Hazard, they're both very similar. And the organization that she's working for is very worried that if their product malfunctions, they'll get a bad rap and lose all their contracts. Then she tells him that she's here to defuse the ticking time bomb that is Hazard and to bring him back. And she immediately realizes that Matt knows when people lie to him. Matt says that he'll help her find him, but Natasha says that she has to do it alone. Then she asks what happened to Matt Murdock after the Kingpin destroyed him. And she looks at his mask, and then back to Matt, and says that he can come along tonight. Elsewhere, Hazard sits in his mother's home as she recounts to him what happened. She says that she thought it was the Russians or a terror attack or even the apocalypse. But she stayed right inside the whole time. And it wasn't until a few days later when she finally had to leave to go to the store that she saw this blood soaked in the streets and the destruction that was left behind. But now that the Lord has blessed her son with getting home, she finally feels safe again. Then someone knocks at the door, and his mother explains that she's taking care of her younger sister's son, Tommy. Ah! What the fuck? Oh my god, that is terrifying. It just popped up at me. Jesus Christ, I know kids can be tough to draw, but what the fuck? Anyway, little Tommy boy here says that he wants to grow up to be a great soldier, just like his cousin, and asks Jack if he can teach him. Then Jack begins sweating and sees both his mother and Tommy as the doctor. He tosses his head into his hands and starts crying. His mother says that he was always too sensitive, but she'll take care of him until he feels better. And then she leans in to give him a little kiss and retches back, clutching her chest. Jack grabs his mother, but she says it's fine. It's happened before. It's just a little heart murmur. Later that night, Jack and Tommy hang out in Jack's old room. Tommy's new room, I suppose. Jack orders Tommy to give him his best pledge to stand at perfect attention, and then takes his handgun out of his holster and gives it to the boy. Jack tells him that if Tommy has anyone down the sight of that gun, Once that trigger's pulled, they're dead, and then he orders Tommy to point it directly at him, and if Jack ever tries to leave his sight, to pull the trigger. Then he begins rambling nonsensical tirades about patriotism, America, and everything he gave up to keep people like Tommy safe. Then he stares out of the window and salutes the red, white, and blue fireworks, and tells Tommy that when you're a soldier, you can kill anything you want. Anyone you want, and it's legal. But if you're not a soldier, it's just cold-blooded murder. Meanwhile, Daredevil and Black Widow leap through Hell's Kitchen, Natasha reminiscing about her old times, and as they pass through the battlefield caused by Nuke, she sort of reveals what the fuck is up with Hazard. It was part of a project that, through various biofeedback, hypnosis, augmentations, and electronics, Hazard can now make people have heart attacks telepathically. Not exactly someone you want to fight against. Later, they arrive on the roof of Hazard's mother's building, and Natasha plans a route down. Hazard leaps down, kicking Black Widow to the rooftop as Daredevil goes into action. Hazard tells them that they ordered him to kill, but they never told him how to stop. Daredevil tells him that no one has to die, and tries to calm Jack down. Jack says that he'll never trust the Lord of Lies. Not after he's spent years in hell already. And then Jack unleashes his giant fist at Daredevil, but Daredevil gets the upper hand and slams him into the ground. How could you let me walk into this? You knew Hazard was religious, didn't you?
You're the one who wears a devil suit.
So what's your game, Natasha? To drive him to suicide? Keep the blood off your own hands that way?
Let's just see how good their heart is. Come on, you devil. I want to see justice done.
You didn't kill him, did you?
That's where your mind is? You almost died. Look, he had a gun the whole time.
I'll trade you a snap's neck for a bullet to the brain. You two devils sitting here trying to pass judgment on me. You have no power. I see who you are. Superheroes can't save me. I just want what everyone wants. To go home, to some land, to a wife. That was supposed to be the end of the road. That was the carrot on the stick.
Don't do it, Widow.
He wants it. He's dead already, like he says.
He's still a man who fought for his country and is right now fighting for his own sanity.
I want to show you something. I want to show you my wife and my child. Her beautiful face. It was all that got me through it. Every foxhole. Every battle. But I'm old now. I'm gonna build a house and put up a TV antenna and hang out the wash. I'm gonna do it all.
Show it to me, Jack.
You can escape all the bullets, but you still get killed by the war. Look at my hands. They're always curled around a neck or a gun. My hands can't touch a woman or pet a cat or play with a child. They don't caress. They pull triggers. I kill. That's what I do. Keep it pointed at me. I'm dangerous. Here. It's all right.
No, don't touch the trigger.
Sometime later, deep within the tunnel network below New York that once housed the Morlocks, Sabertooth leaps out of the darkness, slashing a man's chest and another's face. This group was exploring the tunnels because it's now free real estate, but Sabertooth has since made these fucking weird-ass underground military tunnels his territory. And then he grabs the young woman that the two men were with as they flee. Sabertooth takes her back to his den and tosses her on the floor and begins prowling the tunnels. So like I said, Sabertooth, he's killed a fair amount of the Morlocks already, and at this time, he's now just kind of chilling down here as like making this his home until he gets the order to go ahead and start killing off the X-Men themselves. Then he returns and lies down next to the girl and falls asleep. And elsewhere, Daredevil leaps freely over the rooftops until he stops in an alley and watches some stray dogs fight. Look, his real identity as Matt Murdock has just been completely ruined. We'll see what happens with that at a later point in the series, but at this time, he really doesn't have too much going on for him other than being Daredevil, living with Karen Page, and I guess watching dogs fight. He watches as the better dog wins and starts eating some garbage, and then he hears the panicked hearts and smells gunpowder. He handedly stops a mugger as the others run away. Why do you always run? Just stupid, I guess. You know we'll be out in a week. Don't I know it? So why bother? Brightens my day. I love this interaction because, like Batman, Daredevil suffers from being cast as an all too serious character, especially within just the pop culture idea of Daredevil. Coincidentally enough, both characterizations completely changed after being overhauled by Frank Miller, but he doesn't always need to be like that. Sure, he can be dark and serious, but you know what you can also do is have your characters display more than one emotion. Elsewhere in Hell's Kitchen, we're introduced to two small children who you better get used to and start to like. They're pretty likable, I like them, because they are staples of Ann Nocenti's Hell's Kitchen. These two are Darla and Butch. They're brother and sister skateboarders who are part of a little kid gang that call themselves the Fat Boys. And they're also, like, Mojo World people? Or something that were transformed into children by Mojo in, like, the Long Shot series? I don't really know what that's all about. So I just ignore it, because it never comes up, and it honestly ruins their interactions in the stories if they are, like, alien people that got turned into kids or something. So for all intents and purposes, Darla, Butch, and the rest of the kid gang, the Fat Boys, are just normal kids. Anyway, they're watching a horror movie involving a very Sabertooth-looking werewolf when Butch tosses their cat at Darla, scaring her something fierce. He laughs hysterically as she punches him until their father tells him to knock it off. So the kids say that they're heading to the library, and later, in the formerly Morlock-owned tunnel system, Butch leads his sister to a gang of various punk youths as they set up their new hangout. Butch and Darla, I guess, or at least Butch for the most part, he wants to really join this gang because he thinks that they're big and cool, and Darla just like kind of has to go along with them because she's the younger sibling. Unfortunately, all of the amateur construction noise and two kids fighting over a plot of land wakes up the Minotaur of this terrible labyrinth. Raphael, which is I don't know, is that a coincidence that one of the members of this gang living in the sewers is named Raphael in a Daredevil comic? He stops the idiots from fighting over a spot, and then a horrific howl echoes through the tunnels. Raph then orders Butch to go find what made it, and Butch, not wanting to disappoint his prospective gang leader, nervously walks towards the darkness when Sabertooth leaps out and snarls his teeth, and then, like the absolute fucking monster that he is, says,
I have slept, and now I hunger.
This is New York, buddy. These streets are protected by Daredevil. Mess with us, and he'll find you and he'll beat you up.
Sabertooth then just laughs at him and says that he'll be back for these kids. Later, Daredevil makes his way around when Sabertooth erupts atop him. Sabertooth tackles Daredevil off a roof and into a street, and then they just start whooping each other's asses until Sabertooth slinks down into the sewers, and Daredevil quickly follows him. Daredevil is just barely able to follow Creed's scent through the cacophony of gray water, shit, trash, glop, slop, shatter shat, sipper drips, and whatever else. Then he's tackled out of the shadows, and they crash through a wall right into Sabertooth's den. Daredevil slams Creed into some pipes and makes his way to free the young woman. Sabertooth punctures his claws into Matt's abdomen and starts trying to carve out his chest. Daredevil grabs Creed and flips him up and over, and oh my god, there's just a Morlock corpse in this fucking wall. Sabertooth is like,
Oh, look. One of those Morlocks must have crawled back there during the Mutant Massacre.
Can you tell that this is a tie-in issue? This episode is brought to you by my comics, specifically the Custodians Agents of Cross, which I am serializing over on my Patreon, patreon.com/Smokey's videos. It's over 60 pages of pure comics for only $15, but you can see it serialized weekly over on my Patreon for as little as $2. It is a love letter to the Silver Age filled with fun characters, crazy stories, and even fake advertisements. I'm also serializing each issue of Destructo Boy, a fun sci-fi zany epic that is fit for the whole family and follows a little robot on a giant space station as he battles crime, villainy, and giant monsters and whatever threats should arise to his home. Each weekly serialized post includes commentary and annotations on the comic. I am also posting commentary tracks for the MCU, the Snyderverse, and any movies in general over at Pop Pop Popcorn, which I will be posting a audio commentary track of any movie and a follow-up discussion video. There's also behind-the-scenes progress posts of The Custodians as I am working on it, original art, and much more. How much would that suck, too? You get a new series, get one fucking issue in, and then the second one you get, it's a goddamn tie-in. She does it perfectly, like, it works. Sabertooth actually does something smart. He notices that Daredevil is sniffing and tilting his head, and he realizes that Daredevil's blind, and immediately calls him out on it. Daredevil pulls himself out of the rubble, and Sabertooth crashes toward his hostage. Then Sabertooth just fucking slashes her across the face, trying to kill her, and Daredevil clocks him and races to help the girl. He discovers that she still has a weak heartbeat and blood loss, but she's still barely alive. And then he turns to a weakened Sabertooth and demands to know why he killed her. And Sabertooth kind of like comes to his senses for a second. Like everything that he just did and has done his whole life just sort of comes to. And he says that the hunger makes him act like this. But that's where he ends the sentence, because that brief moment of him coming to his senses is just destroyed by an animalistic howl, and then he races away. The girl awakens, and Daredevil tells her that he's here to save her. He asks if Sabertooth hurt her or did anything to her while she was his prisoner, and she says that he was, like, weirdly kind and didn't even, like, touch her, and just sort of left her to stay there. Barely acknowledged her at all, aside from that initial time that he grabbed her and took her to his den. And she says that it's like he wanted her to be with him, but wasn't sure for what purpose. Like he knew, like, oh, that's a woman, I'm a man, I don't know where to go from there. And then something I really enjoy about Innocenti's take on Sabertooth through this issue, and then other people's sort of discussions of Sabertooth in this issue, is she says that he was like a man trapped in an animal's body, which I think is just a perfect way for Sabertooth to be characterized. Daredevil frees her and wraps her in some makeshift bandaging and then carries the girl out of the darkness. Sometime later, in a dark, dank boiler room, an albino man speaks over the phone to a pregnant woman, telling her that she's radioactive, rotting herself and her baby with all the cigarettes she's smoking. She freaks out and tosses the cigarettes into the sink and begs to know who this voice over the phone is and why he keeps calling her. And the albino asks why she keeps answering and listening to him. Then he hangs up and says that next time he'll make contact. Hey, remember Darla and Butch? They're back, and they have all their friends with them on this rooftop skate park. When Daredevil shows up, all the kids just freak out because they're meeting a superhero, but Daredevil says that he's just passing through. And one of the fat boys starts talking shit and says that Daredevil never actually does anything daring. So Daredevil grabs a skateboard from a kid and does some crazy-ass tricks, and all the kids lose it. How fucking great is that? Later that day, Matt walks down the street until he distinguishes the shape moving towards him. Karen Page. They kiss, and Karen accidentally opens Matt's shirt, almost revealing his costume. And I just love the expression on her face in this panel. It's just fantastic. Also, Karen in this series is just the best depiction of Karen Page, bar none. Superior in every way. It's the best version of her. They walk and later run into a homeless man that Matt knows named Vegas. Vegas lives in an abandoned lot between two buildings in a wrecked car and is joined by a Columbia law student who can't afford rent, so Vegas has rented out the back seat. Meanwhile, the albino, who we will come to know as RotGut, wanders through the hellscape of New York City, experiencing the horrors of invisible poisons that no one else sees, foreign devils who infect the gene pool, the breeding ground of the subway, emanating disgusting fogs and vapors, the smoke of cigarettes, the homeless who breed disease, and the old who harbor brain viruses. He then notices that the Asian woman he's following is getting too far away, so he speaks up and asks her why she wants to die. He then grabs her and says that poison incubates in the gut and promises to cut it out of her, but she's able to get away and runs off screaming. And something about her screams flash him back to the past when he was a child. In particular experience involved his mother arriving home earlier than he had expected. She caught him watching television and eating a hamburger and chips, and she chastised him for eating grease, leaving the window open and allowing germs to be blown in, sitting too close to the TV's microwaves, which no doubt caused radioactive poison, not having taken the garbage out and letting it fester, and worst of all, eating a Twinkie and a soda. She says that these things will rot his guts and give him cancer. And then she drags him to the kitchen and pours the soda into a cup and drops a penny inside, showing him how it'll corrode within less than a week. And if it does that to a penny, imagine what it's doing to his body. Then she says not to touch anything after touching the money, because money is the dirtiest thing of all. But then she hugs her son and promises to keep him safe and protected. Anyway, Matt Murdock's a fry cook now. And he works in a diner because he got disbarred. So Matt has come on for his shift and is making small talk with a regular when the waitress, Hilda, comes over and tells him that there's a creep in the corner booth with some major psycho energy. Matt says he'll take care of it and heads over to the guy to talk to find it's RotGut, staring at his hamburger and fish skeleton. Oh no, those are french fries. Matt asks if there's something wrong with the food, and RotGut tells him it's slaughtered cow meat, full of fear hormones, and that he won't use an open bottle of catsup. He's heard that aspirin killers switched to using catsup. And that's like kind of a reference to a real event in the early 80s, but in real life it was Tylenol. I don't know if there was something aspirin related, but I'm most familiar with the Tylenol bottles being laced with potassium cyanide. And that was an actual event where someone was going around and being able to open Tylenol bottles and lace them with drugs that killed at least 7 people. Not counting all the copycats who then followed afterward. And that is, weirdly enough, not the last time that event will be referenced in this series. RotGut then freaks out and leaves out of the back, and Matt follows him for a bit until he notices RotGut purchasing some company. He then follows them and tries to stop the woman from going with RotGut, but he gets yelled at by the woman's pimp. So Daredevil just sort of sulks away because the weird albino really hasn't done anything wrong but being a weirdo. And then a car zooms by and fucking splashes him with a puddle. Then the scene changes to RotGut holding a blade to the prostitute's face after he has tied her down to the bed frame. About a week later, a slumlord named Mr. Hirsch is harassing an elderly woman for her rent as she begs him to please fix the gas heater leak when Daredevil appears perched on her window. He uses his lawyeristic knowledges and tells the man that he's in violation of a plethora of building laws and tenant laws. But he's sure that Hirsch will get the leak and plumbing and the rats dealt with. Then Hirsch runs out, promising to do just that. The old woman thanks him for helping her and offers Daredevil some sweetbread. Then he swings away, and as he does so, he thinks that although he dealt with the slumlord, it was really a big waste of time following the lead that someone fitting the description of the Hell's Kitchen slasher was seen in the building. He didn't even smell any gas in the apartment. Back in the home, RotGut appears, and his mother asks him why he was hiding. Then he leaves and makes his way down to the basement where he begins working on various pipes and machinery. Later, Matt wakes Karen up with a bouquet of flowers, and before they can get a little more intimate, their friend Hilda from the diner stops by with her new boyfriend, Boffo. B-O-F-F-O. Boffo. Because they're going on a double date. Later after dinner, Matt and Karen say goodbye to Boffo and Hilda, and a few minutes of walking later, Boffo races up and says that Hilda just took off and told him to get Matt. She says that she has a police whistle and would blow it if she gets in trouble, and then he tells him that she saw a guy who was in the diner last week, and she just wigged out and started following him. Then Matt races away. Elsewhere, Hilda has snuck her way into the apartment basement and watches as RotGut loads a giant red pill-shaped container labeled danger poison and hooks it into the building's water supply. She jumps out and shouts for him to stop, but RotGut says it's too late. Then he brandishes a scalpel on her. Outside, a downpour has begun. Matt listens and smells as best as he can, but the rain is seriously affecting his abilities. Then the Fat Boys rock up and ask if they can help him. He tells them to get inside out of the cold when he hears Hilda's whistle. Matt kicks down the door to the basement just before RotGut tries to stab her, but the door's booby-trapped and all of the disassembled pipes rain down on Daredevil. Hilda tells Matt about RotGut's plan, but he hits her with a piece of dilapidated wood and makes his way to turn on the machines to pump the poison through the building. Luckily, the fat boys don't care for rules or instructions and follow Daredevil to where he went and heard everything. They race upstairs and begin knocking on every door possible in the building and telling people not to drink the water. Everyone but one very angry man who shouts obscenities at the boy. And the boy then tells him nothing about what happened and watches as the angry man drinks his glass of water. Meanwhile, Daredevil tries to gain his senses as the chattering, clanging, and operating machinery echoes around him. He desperately fends off RotGut. Then his mother appears, and RotGut runs and apologizes, and she says that she's been poisoned. RotGut begs for her forgiveness, as he did everything she ever told him to. But she says that she knew when he was growing inside of her that she could feel something rotten. Then she tells him that something as rotten as him could never have a mother, and races back upstairs. RotGut grabs his knife and prepares to drive it through his own heart when Daredevil stops him. And Matt tells the man that only God and the courts can decide his fate. Sometime later, paramedics arrive at the scene and the police arrest and escort RotGut away. And the boy watches as the angry man's body is loaded into the back of an ambulance. Several months later, it's Christmas Eve in Hell's Kitchen. A sidewalk Santa collects donations for poor kids until Daredevil rocks up in his best The Thing disguise cosplay and tells the fat boys to stop stealing people's money and to go donate it to a real charity. So they go down the street and donate all their earnings to a kindly old nun who thanks the kids and blesses them. And as Daredevil walks the kids away, the nun thinks about how she already covered the rental cost for that nun costume. Elsewhere, a man who calls himself the Trickster laments that he has used so many names and faces in his life that he should be more famous for his abilities of illusion and disguise. Then he picks up the paper and reads about Daredevil, and he wonders what made Daredevil the way he is. And then he just becomes a demon? And the Trickster is just, I don't even know, just one of the weirdest characters in the series. Is he a demon? Is he Mephisto? Is he a real magician? Is it all just special effects or something like Mysterio? What is he? Is just one of the most perplexing characters I have ever encountered while reading comics, and you're gonna find out why. Later at Rockefeller Center, a crowd has gathered in the square, ignoring the brilliant Christmas decor and massive tree. Instead, they focus on a figure perched at a ledge between both buildings, preparing to tightrope walk across. Then Daredevil appears at the scene and tells the police that he'll handle whatever this is, and the angelic skull-headed figure begins crossing the wire, perfectly balanced, and Daredevil uses his radar and discovers that the thing up there is pulsating with some kind of chaotic force, and that it's almost mechanical in nature. The Trickster begins performing acrobatic tricks atop the wire, but he comes to a stop when Daredevil appears on the other side. Daredevil tells Trickster that he needs to get him off these wires right now, and that his gadget is vibrating the nearby buildings and could cause structural instability. Then the Trickster begins jumping up and down on the wire, forcing Daredevil into action. The two topple off, but are each able to grab hold of the wire. Daredevil pleads with the man to just get to safety and get off, but Trickster says that he prefers being out here on the edge. Then he waits for Daredevil to pick himself back up and somehow grabs him in a chokehold. Daredevil frees himself and kicks Trickster in the head, smashing the skull and revealing his humanoid figure. Then Trickster asks if Daredevil can save his life. Daredevil tells him to stop whatever crazy device he's using to achieve all this, because he's like, you're just a weird supervillain with a gimmick. What the fuck? Just calm down, guy. But the Trickster's scarf gets wrapped around the wire and he falls off. Matt quickly slides down and hangs to pull up his adversary as he can still hear a faint heartbeat. But the Trickster scuttles up and off of him and back onto the wire and just races away. What the fuck was that? Later that day, after Matt has given up the search for Trickster, he and Karen come across a crowd being entertained by none other than the Trickster. Matt runs off into an alley, changes, runs back, and kisses Karen and tells her that he loves her and leaps into action. Trickster conducts crazy dance moves for a crowd, and then he notices Daredevil and makes a quick escape up the side of a building, breaking away the stonework with his cloven hooves. Daredevil gives chase in his own way, and he leaps onto the building Trickster was climbing up, but it gives out from beneath him, and he falls. but he's caught by the Trickster. The stranger pulls Matt up, and we finally see that Trickster is now wearing a fake halo over his head and has strange face paint for some reason. And he expertly climbs up the side of the building as he asks if Daredevil feels good when he saves people. Also, the building they're climbing, it's the Empire State Building, and Trickster leads him straight to the top, just as a nice, convenient thunderstorm has begun rolling into New York, and Trickster repeatedly begs Daredevil to just speak to him. But Matt is unable to even open his mouth, and he finally makes his way to the very peak of the skyscraper where he finds that the Trickster has tied himself to the steeple. Then Trickster starts screaming that he doesn't know how he got up here and pleads with Daredevil to save him. Matt silently tries to quickly but calmly remove the wires around his wrists when lightning strikes the steeple directly, blowing Daredevil to a lower observation deck. Several hours later, Karen and Hilda are at Matt and Karen's place. Karen worries about where Matt is, and then she turns around to find Hilda leaving the bathroom, having just shot up. Hilda suggests that maybe Matt is cheating on her, and then she reveals that she knows that Karen is an ex-junkie too. She breaks down because she was stood up by Boffo, of all people. Karen says that they were both stood up and suggests that they order some Chinese food and stay inside since it's started snowing. And meanwhile, Matt Murdock sits alone atop the Empire State Building, pondering on the existence of the Trickster, someone who sought Matt out because the Trickster thought that Daredevil was in some way better than him. Matt wonders why he couldn't bring himself to speak earlier. Then he wonders if he turns around, will the corpse actually be a magician's dummy? And he continues sitting there, listening to the snowfall. The end. How great is that? How intense and just superb. What a great start. First 5 issues just off the bat, just like that. I just love it so much. It's so great. Let me know what you thought of this first volume of Ann Nocenti's Daredevil in the comments below. What's your favorite Daredevil? Is it Miller? Is it Bendis? Is it Nocenti? Is it the Shadowland guy? Is it the one that gave Daredevil that cool black and red suit in the 90s? Is it the Stan Lee one? Comment below, let me know. And of course, as always, leave any suggestions for any comics that you would like to see me cover in the future below. How absolutely incredible is that first issue? That alone could have just been a complete standalone story. It's so succinct but moving. It's emotionally and politically charged in something that everyone can understand, which is the mistreatment of former members of the military, of mental illness, of health issues. Just blown away into nothing. Those things are completely ignored for the spectacle of fireworks and the romanticizing of violence and war and pure greed as well. That first issue, oh my god, it makes me cry every time I read it. It made me cry the first time I read it. It made me cry this time when I was writing the script. It's just fantastic. And I think that these first 5 issues, they're very serialized. They're one-off stories, standalone stories. Later in the series, we do get continuing storylines, but at this time, just each one really stands out. Although this one, we do get 2 issues of RotGut, so that's interesting. But it just all works so well. And yeah, there are tie-in issues like we saw with the Sabertooth Mutant Massacre one. And I understand why a lot of people don't like tie-ins. It completely breaks the flow of the proper story in the series, and unless you're reading the event completely with every single issue that is tying into that, then the tie-in doesn't fucking matter. But Ann Nocenti just handles it so gracefully and weaves it into the story in so many great ways, especially in the future once we get to like Inferno, and I think there's one other one. What is it? The one where Acts of Vengeance, I think, is where like the supervillains switch which heroes they're fighting. Those are comics that she has crossovers with, and she just fucking demolishes the actual story, just makes it so much better than anything else. But the Mutant Massacre tie-in issue is definitely the weakest link of her writing these tie-ins. And what about the Trickster? You want to talk about the Trickster? I love that they don't explain who the fuck the Trickster is, what the Trickster is. He says things like, in reference to himself, "You've had so many aliases, I've forgotten your original name." He's called the Trickster. Somebody in the crowd during one of his, when he's walking across the wire, says Lucifer wasn't daring, he was booted out of the kingdom. He fucking wears the skull head. He has cloven feet at one point for some reason. Like, is he a demon? Is he Mephisto? Because if you're unaware, Mephisto plays a very large role in this series in the future. So is this, in a way, setting up Mephisto fucking with Matt Murdock, which is something that he'll start doing a lot. Who's to say? Probably Annocenti, I suppose, but not me. I love it so much. Like I said, if you want to see more, because I feel like if I talk any more about it, I'm just going to be repeating everything I've said already about why I love it in every issue. So go check out the Comic Shtick podcast episodes. Like I said, the first 10 or 15 are where I'm discussing this series itself. As always, check out my Patreon for behind-the-scenes stuff, audio commentaries, artwork, my comics, which I serialize weekly, and early access to videos when available. Check out my Etsy shop. Follow me on Instagram @NotBlakeWild, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!